inviting me. We're going to talk mostly about searching for Ramapo Valley, Bergen County ancestors. And so I have a few different families from Ramapo Valley, the Mala area, that are in the talk. I just gave a general thing. The handout is for somebody who's like beginning genealogy. There's a pedigree chart, and the secret for the pedigree chart is your number 1 and your father is double your number 2. So his father is double his number 4, and number 4's father is double the number 8, and that's the way that works. And then for each person on your chart, you should have a group sheet like the second page. And you can do this now on the computer. You can do it on Ancestry.com, but you can still do it with paper and pencil the way most of us started way back when. This is a group sheet for every couple on your sheet. And then I have 14 different things to look for when you're doing your roots. I'm not going to read it to you because you can read it yourself, but I hope to have all 14 of those things show up at the talk. Okay. Everybody thinks nowadays, oh, Ancestry.com, that's all I have to do, because you see those ads, and they have those leaves, those magic leaves that are going to give you absolutely all your answers in the world. And then they have shows where the celebrities, in a half an hour search back, 4,000 years to Charlemagne. And they walk into a depository and the person says, here, here's your family. Not going to happen. But, that being said, thank God for Ancestry, because those of us who use it really love it, and it has a great record. So here's the kind of the good news and the bad news about Ancestry. The bad news is it's not free. But you can get it monthly. You can get it for, monthly is $19.99 a month. And you can sign up for free for 14 days. Now, when you sign up for free for 14 days, you have to give your credit card number. And if you don't cancel it on the 13th day, they'll bill you for the next month for $19.99. Of course, $19.99 a month is more expensive than buying it on a yearly or even a 6-month basis. And the numbers in parentheses are the Christmas numbers. They're having a 10% sale for Christmas until December 26th. You can get them, instead of $99 for 6 months, you can get it for $89. And you can get a year for $169 instead of $189. So right now is a good time to get it if you want to get it. The other good news, it's available at many libraries. Can you hear me without the mic? Anybody have any trouble? Okay. The other thing is it's available at the Ridgewood Public Library, thanks to a donation from the Genealogy Society of Bergen County. And it's also available at the LDS libraries for free. There's one in Mala and there's one in Emerson. The bad news is the one in Emerson is open a lot more frequently than the one in Mala. But still. What kind of records can you find on Ancestry? Mainly, everybody thinks of Ancestry, think of census records. And the census records are great because they're now indexed. And before that came out, you would have to either consult a separate index if there was one, or just go page by page by page for the record. Now you can find your ancestor in the census record and click on it and get right to the page. Now there's errors in the indexing because some people write sloppily. Some of the records were indexed in other countries, mainly China and India. They thought that would be a great idea because those persons would index it letter by letter by letter. So you had D-U-V-I-D, Duvid. Well, we know nobody's named Duvid, it's David, but when you're in China, you don't know that, so your ancestor may be Duvid. So you kind of have to fool around with, leave out the first name, leave out the last name, different things to find the records. Vital records, which are birth, marriage, and death records. When we're talking about vital records, we're talking about state, county, official records, not church records. U.S. passports, passenger lists for Philadelphia and New York. I don't know why that page is there. It's actually the last page, but anyway, probate records, city records. This is when you get Ancestry, you get a family tree like this, and those are the leaves they talk about. You see where it says Ancestry hints and there's a leaf? Here's my new toy. Right there. And it says 4 historical records and 1 family tree. When you click on that leaf, it will bring up the 4 historical records. Now, it may be a record that you really need. But in this case, I have Emma Hopper, born in 1849 in New Jersey. She was married to an Andrew. And in 1880, they had her, when I clicked on the leaf, they had an Emma Hopper who was married to a Peter Hopper and lived in Patterson. But she was born in 1849 and her name was Emma. So they thought that was a good thing. And it was a good thing to check out. But what happens is people will say, oh, that's mine, because Ancestry said it was, and they click on it and they add it to their tree. And their trees sometimes are very cool with errors. And when it has a family tree, the information on the family tree is only as good as the person who put the information in the family tree. So use them, but be very careful of the family trees. One of the things the family trees are good for is pictures. People put pictures of their grandfather or their great-grandfather, which could also be your great-grandfather, and you don't even have a picture of them. So sometimes the family trees are very good for pictures. I'm going to talk a little bit about the census records, because that's one of the things we use the most. And basically, before 1850, it was just the head of the household and how many people were in his household. So it was a system of hash marks. So there could be John Hopper, and he was 45 or over, and he had 1 male that was under 5 and 1 male that was 10 to 15. And he had 1 female who was over 45 and 2 females that were 5 to 16, something like that. But in 1850, that's an important one because it's the first time it lists everybody by name. It doesn't give the relationship. So we have William Hopper, who's 63, and Bridget, who's 53. We kind of think they're probably husband and wife. The next one is David Hopper, 22, and Jane Hopper, 22, and then 2 children, 6 and 2. So probably David was William's son, and his wife and 2 children were living with the father. And then there was James, who was 20, and a laborer. But he's probably another son. Well, when you go and investigate it all, that's true. David was William's son. We have no idea who James was. He definitely wasn't William's son. He could have been a cousin, a nephew, or we don't know. But anyway, this is what it tells us. William G. Hopper lived in the township of Hohkus. He was 63, a farmer whose real estate was valued at $16,000, which is quite a bit of money back in those days. He was living with him was Bridget, 53, David, 27, a miller, Jane Maria, 27, William, 6, who attended school. That's what that little check mark there means. And Andrew, 4, and James, 20, a laborer. You know, there were censuses in 1860 that were almost the same as 1870, except that including the real estate, they also asked for personal estate, so you got a little bit more information, which was really great. But after 1860, they stopped asking that question altogether. They're very frustrated. They ask good questions, and then they stop asking them, and, you know, whatever. So in 1850, there was also a slave census. And if you look at the slave census, there were 41 slaves in Bergen County, and they were all aged 90 to 50, because those under 50 were born to, it was a system in Bergen County where they were eventually eliminating slavery. So the children were born free, and then they kept, when they got to be 21, then they were totally free. Up till 21, they worked for their master. After that, they were totally free. So all the black people under 50 were all free. There was only 41 in Bergen County, only 3 in Hohkus Township, which Marlowe was part of in Hohkus Township. However, one of those owners was William G. Hopper, the man we just saw in the 1850 census. And he was the grandfather, the great-grandfather of David Hopper, who Carol wrote a lot about in Ramapo Chronicles. So we're going to skip the 1860, 70, and 80 census. We're totally going to skip the 1890 census because it burned, and there's only a few counties in Ohio or something that are left. This is the 1900 census, and it says Hohkus Township, part of east of the railroad. And we're going to talk about this family right here. For some reason, this family was always at the bottom of the page. It would be easy for me if they were at the top of the page, but. So this is all the information on the 1900 census. It was the first census that asked for the month and the year of birth. Unfortunately, it was the only census that asked for the month and the year of birth. That wonderful question they had in 1900, they deleted after that. So David Hopper was 28, a bookkeeper, misspelled, so that's why it says sick. Born September 1871. He had been married 2 years to Anna C., who was 27, and she was born September 1872. And she was the mother of one living child, Emma 1. Emma was born March 1899. I'm sorry, that should be 69. They were living in a rented house in Hohkus Township. Living with them were his mother, Emma Hopper, 49, a widow, born June 1850, who had borne 2 children, one of whom, David, was living, and his Aunt Maggie, 59, born September 1840, who was single and had borne no children. All were born in New Jersey, as were their parents, and all adults could read and write. That's what those yeses there were for. The question was, could you read, could you write, could you speak English? And David was a bookkeeper who had not been unemployed during the year. There's a place over there, see where it says 0? That means he was unemployed for 0 months. The 1940 census is the last census that's available to us. They're kept private and secret for 72 years. And so it was 2012, April 1st, that we waited patiently for the 1940 census to come out. And it tells us a lot. David Hopper now was 68. He was a male, white, born in New Jersey. He was married to Anna Hopper, who was 67, and the father of Aletta Hopper, 25, and single. All were born in New Jersey, and all had completed 4 years of high school. They lived on Ramapo Avenue in Cragmere, and unincorporated part of Hohkus Township. If you, as I did, put in David Hopper, Mahwah, New Jersey, which Mahwah, it was Mahwah in 1940, nothing comes up. Only 204 people lived in Mahwah, according to the census, because they had them living in the neighborhoods. So he lived in Cragmere, not Mahwah. They paid $40 a month rent on their house, and they had lived in the same house in 1935. David worked 46 hours the prior week and 52 weeks in the year and earned $1,200 for the year as an office clerk in a food business. Anna was not working or seeking work, and she worked at home doing housework. Aletta was a public school teacher who had worked 32 hours the previous week and 30 works in the year, for which she earned $750. Teachers aren't well paid then either. Another thing that Ancestry has is military records. And you might think, well, my ancestors never was in the military, so I don't have to look for military records. But if he was of a certain age, he was subject to the draft and had to fill in a draft card. In 1917 and 1918, all the men under up to 39, I think it was, had to fill in the draft card from 17 to 18, 39 years. Here's Herman Mann. He was lived in Mahwah, New Jersey. He was born March 29, 1892. He was natural born. He was born in Mahwah. He was a laborer. He was 25 years old. He worked for Clifford Ward in Suffolk, New York, and he had a wife and 3 children. He was married, and he'd never been in the military before. He signed his own name, and up here it asks he was of medium build, a medium height, with brown eyes, black hair, and he was not bald. And this was 1917. Now, you notice there's a little triangle that's sort of cut off here, and there's a little triangle cut off there, which means that this page was the back of that page. So that the triangle was cut off on the front of that page and the back of this page. Now, next to the triangle, there's a C. Anyone know what that was for? It says here, if person is of African descent, tear off the corner. And then they put a C there for color. 52 men with the surname Mann registered for the draft in 1917 and 1918. 30 were black or of African descent, and about 20 were white. Now, the reason I'm saying about is some of them didn't have their corner torn off, but they had the C. So we're not quite sure whether they forgot to turn off the corner or whatever. But 1918, they asked you for your race. 20 were white, and 2, both of whom were born in Rockland County, identified themselves as Indian or Native American. I thought that was kind of interesting. Here's what the 1918 one looks like. Remember how I said they put good questions in, then they take them out? 1917, they asked them what they were, where they were born. They didn't bother asking that in 1918. Just to drive us crazy. So Alonzo Mann was lived in Mawa. He was born May 2nd, 1879. He was native born. He was a Negro. He was a molder for the American Brake Shoe Company. And his nearest relative was Viola Mann. Now we don't know if she's his wife or not. Could be his mother, we don't know. And if you notice where it's Alonzo signs his name, there's an X. And under that it says attested, which means that he could not sign his own name. Then he signed the X, and somebody attested that that was his X. And he was of medium height and medium build, and slender build. And he had brown hair, brown eyes, and black hair. And he had no distinguishing marks. So even though your relative wasn't in the military, doesn't mean they didn't have some records, military records. And if he was in the military, you might be able to find pension records or service records. This is 1942. This is called the Old Man's Draft. The draft of young men has not been released because some of them are still living and it's considered private. These men were all older. For instance, this man was 44 years old in 1942, so pretty much he's not living. His name is George Millington Leavenworth. He lived with Mrs. Florence Trimble in Mahwah, New Jersey, and he was born in Norfolk, Connecticut. And for some reason, he worked for a company that was in Seattle, Washington. But they must have done something in Mahwah for them, I don't know why.
Well, if he's a marine cook, he probably is on the
Maybe.
shipping.
Yeah. I'd like to introduce you to Emily Rose de Groat. Emily Rose de Groat was born on 16th of June, 1895 in Mahwah, New Jersey. She was the daughter of Edward de Groat, also born in Mahwah, and Annie Hughes. She was later baptized in the Presbyterian Church of Hillsborough, New York. On the 30th of June, 1922, she was a single, age 27 years old, a public school teacher residing at 204 Lawrence Place of Patterson. She was 5'1" tall with brown eyes, a medium forehead and nose, medium mouth, medium brown hair, and dark complexion and a round face. That's her signature. Where do you suppose I got all that information on Emily?
That's a passport photo.
It's a passport photo, exactly. She applied for a passport. On the 30th of June, 1922, she applied for a passport, stating she planned to go be abroad temporarily and would return within 3 years. She would travel to Germany while en route to Liberia, where she would be doing missionary work for the Bethel Pentecostal Assembly of Newark, New Jersey. She also would be traveling to BI, France. Does anyone know what that means? BI, here?
British Islands, British Indies.
Maybe. She was planning to traveling on the SS Reliance on the 11th of July, 1922 out of New York, and the passport was granted on the 6th of July, 1922. Now, the interesting thing is they couldn't find a birth certificate for her. So her mother had to go to a notary and testify that she knew that her daughter was born. This is the passport. It's very hard to read when I blow it up, which is what I wrote it all out. This is where it gives information about where she was going, where she was traveling. This is the information on her description. Now, prior to passport photos, that's all they would have. this thing about your medium forehead and your large prominent nose and different things like that. But, and still lingered in 1922. They have the physical description and the pictures. But this was also attached to the passport. Usually you just get those 2 pages. But this is an affidavit from her mother. And I like what it says. It says, Annie de Groat, of full age, being duly sworn upon her oath, according to the last, dispose and say that on the 16th day of June, 1895 AD, she gave birth to a female child at Malwa, New Jersey, and who was later baptized in the Presbyterian Church and situated in Hillburn, New York, and baptized with the name of Emily. The deponent further states that she is the mother of the said child, and her maiden name was Annie Hughes. That's huge to get a maiden name from a passport application. Deponent further states, this is my favorite part, that the doctor, namely Dan Van Wagner of Suffern, New York, failed to file a birth certificate with the state of New Jersey, owing to the fact that the said doctor was losing his memory the day after the birth. Can you imagine not having a birth certificate and just having your mother write a piece of paper like this and they'll accept it? You can't make this stuff up. Okay, so you wonder what happened to her. Did she get back from Liberia safely? She did. She came on, to New York on the 25th of November, 1925. So it was in that 3-year span. Her name is de Groat Emily. She's now 30. She was born Malwa, New Jersey, the same birth date, and she's going to Paterson, New Jersey. So she made it. So let's see if we can find out a little bit more about Emily. From the 1910 and 1920 census, the family was living in Waldwick, New Jersey. Emily was the second oldest of Edward and Annie's 8 children. Her father was black and her mother was white, and all the children were listed as mulatto. In 1920, her father was a fireman in a gas house. Annie was a teacher in a grammar school, and 2 of her sisters were weavers in a silk mill. In 1910 and 1920, all were born in New Jersey, as were their parents, except for Annie, whose parents were born in England. And I actually later was able to find that Annie was baptized in Jersey City. In 1930, Emily was back with her parents and her 8 brothers and sisters and 3 nephews. In this census, all were listed as white. And her mother's parents were born in England, and her father's parents were born in France. Which is pretty funny because the passport application said she was born in Malwa and her father was born in Malwa. Emily was 35 and unmarried. Her parents owned the house at 204 Lawrence Street in Paterson, valued at $13,000, which was a lot of money too. Okay, so I wonder what happens to Portia. It's kind of like a soap opera, isn't it? On 1833, Emily de Groat, 38 and single, born in Malwa, on the 16th of June, 1895, arrived in New York City from Liverpool. Maybe she was still a missionary. In April 1940, her parents were both listed as white, and they were living again at 204 Lawrence Street. Sometimes it's Lawrence Place, and sometimes it's Lawrence Street. They can't quite make up their mind. And the house was only valued at $3,000. And they were living with their 3 grandsons. Emily was not with them. Edward was a stationary engineer for a wholesale meat company and made $1,800 for the year. So that was April of 1940. Here we go. 9th of August, 1840, Emily de Groat, 45, single, born in Malwa, 16th of June, 1895, arrived in Philadelphia, PA. She had sailed on the 21st of July, 1940, from Monrovia in Liberia. But she was still a missionary. Pretty special lady. Now, 1940 is the last census. But one of the things we also use to search for our relatives are city directories. Every major city had them, and they predated telephone directories. And if they wanted to find somebody, they needed these directories, especially because people who rented tended to move every year. They moved all the time. Some city directories, like the Ridgewood one, will have a person's death date in the next city directory, they will say, James Smith died such and such a date. And that was for bill collectors who used the city directory. They wanted to know if the person died, so they started putting that in the city directory. But here we have Anna. Now she's the widow of Edward at 204 Lawrence Place. And we have Emily R., missionary, at 204 Lawrence Place. This is 1949 city directory of Patterson. Emily lived to be 91 years old. This is a Social Security death index. It says that she is her Social Security number, that her last residence was Glen Rock, Bergen County, New Jersey. She was born again 16th of June, 1895. That's her. And she died in January 1987. And her Social Security card was issued in New Jersey before 1951. Now there's a place here where you can order the original document. If you needed to know her father's name and didn't know it, or something like that, you might order that. There's a link there that you can print out the form, you can order. It used to be really inexpensive, and now it's quite expensive. It's $27, and that's if you know her Social Security number when she died, and it's $29 if you don't know. And if they can't find it, they're still going to charge you $27. And it will give the applicant's full name, age at last birthday, the date and place of birth, the father and mother's full name, including the mother's maiden name, the gender, and the date signed, and applicant's signature. So if you need that information, it's worthwhile. If you don't, maybe not. Here are some other websites that you might look into other than Ancestry. Archives.com, they give you a 7-day free trial, 3-month membership, one payment of $19.95, equivalent to $6.65 per month. Has a lot of vital records. MyHeritage, you can build a family tree on there, up to 250 people for free, and then, of course, once you've got 250 people and you want to add one more, you'll have to sign up. FamilySearch.com is from the Mormons, the Church of Latter-day Saints, and all of their information on their website is free. If you need to send for records on microfilm, she rented for, was it $375?
$750.
$750? And it has to come into a LDS center, so there's the one in Emerson or the one in Mahwah, and then you can look at the records. And Fold3 is another site, and that's primarily military records, but it also is very good city directories for major cities, like Philadelphia, Cincinnati, Los Angeles, any major city, they have the city directories there. And then findagrave.com. And I'm going to talk a bit about findagrave.com because there have been several people in Bergen County who've done a fabulous job of photographing almost a great majority of the records. And here's what the website looks like. It's free. It was recently, unfortunately, bought by Ancestry.com, who buys everything. Start using this, I'm losing
That's
revenue.
what they do with our $19.95. That's what they do with our $19 a month.
I know. They buy things. And you can either search for a person, you have 121 million graves. You can search for a person, or you can search for a cemetery. So I searched for a cemetery in Mahwah, and the first one I came up with was the Ramapo Lutheran Church Cemetery. And you can see there that they have 57 interments, and 86% of them have been photographed. It even shows you how they repaired this. See the cracks that have been repaired in that stone. They even photographed the back of the stone to show you how it's been repaired. And this is the signage on the site. Here's Redeemer Cemetery. They have 1,375 interments there, and 79% have been photographed. I was interested to see Gretchen Bader, so I put her name in. And actually, she has two two different people made memorials for her. When you see this, when you see RIP, a little tombstone, that means there's a picture of the tombstone on that site. When you see, looks like a photograph, that means there's a picture of the person or a picture of something, could be the person's house, some picture relating to that person. When you see a flower, it means somebody has left a flower or a little note saying maybe they know that person, they just want to be remembered. And when you see a heart, that means that somebody has gone and sponsored that site. And when they sponsor, you see all the ads that show up here? When a site is sponsored, it means the ads don't show up. And I'm privileged to have sponsored her site. And there's her site. She obviously has a little tribute here. There's a picture of her. You know that she died at Lockerbie, Scotland. And then there's different people have added things. There's more. It says, click here to view all the images. This is a very nice tribute. Okay. Ramapo Reformed Church Cemetery and the Mawa Cemetery are separately entered. Here's the Ramapo Reformed Church Cemetery. They have 934 interments, and 74% of them are photographed. Under that, it says 22 other photos requested. You can request a photo. If somebody you're interested, you can click on request a photo, and there are people that volunteer and go around and take the photos. I recently wanted a photo taken in Pennsylvania, and I clicked on, the photo requested. And the very next day, I got the photo, that it was posted on site, and it was by a man who was retarded. And he said that he didn't have much smarts and he didn't do very well at school, but he could take pictures. And he took the picture the next day. It was a great picture. And he's taken something like 2,000 pictures. When you click on it, this is what you get. So there's no pictures of people here, but there are tombstones. And then when you do that, you click on the blue highlight and you'll go right to their picture. There's a Mawa cemetery. I put in Hopper, just the last name. Got all these Hoppers. I was interested in David Hopper, who was from Mawa, so I clicked on that. And there was a ton of information here. It had his wife, it had his 2 wives, and his 4 children, and his brother, Benny. And since Ancestry took over, in their infinite wisdom, they list everybody as a sibling of themselves. So here's David Hopper, and his sibling is David Hopper. We can't figure out, we've asked them to correct it, but I guess with all their computer geniuses, they can't quite figure out how to correct it. Now, the interesting thing, there was no parent link there. Because Emma Hopper is his mother. She's not buried in Mawa, she's buried in Ramapo. But there was no way from his tombstone to know who his parents were, or whatever. So, it's good sometimes to go back the old-fashioned way and use the printed records of the cemetery. Because the printed record of the cemetery, the Ramapo Reformed Church Cemetery inscriptions, shows that Emma Hopper, who was David's mother, was born in 1849 and died in 1918. Her son Benny was the son of A.D., which is Andrew David, and Emma Hopper. He was 7 years old when he died July 18, 1881. And David W. Hopper, who was Andrew's father, died in 1863, in the 41st year. His wife did not die until 1904. She was a widow for a long, long, long time. And then their other son, David, and Jane's other son, Francis, and his wife, Minnie, were buried all in the same plot. And these are from the records of the Ramapo Reformed Church of Mawa. And that's that green binder there. And you can find those records either at the Ridgewood Library in the Boulder Center or at the newly reopened Bergen County Historical Society Library in Hackensack. in the old Arnold Constable's building. And that information is on your handout. Now, you probably noticed that Emma Hopper was married to Andrew Hopper. And if you're going to be dealing with Bergen County or Ramapo ancestors, sooner or later, I guarantee it, you're going to have a cousin marrying a cousin. May not be a first cousin, might be a second cousin, or a first cousin, or a third cousin, but you definitely are going to wind up with cousins marrying cousins, because it was a small community. So, this shows the relationship. Emma and Andrew were second cousins because their grandmothers, Anna Hopper and his grandfather, William G. Hopper, were brother and sister. That makes them second cousins. Okay? Then, if you notice, William Hopper and William Hopper's on two sides of the chart, because I couldn't figure out how else to do it. And Garrett W. Hopper and Garrett W. Hopper are the same. So actually, we're only descended. This was the original immigrant. He died in 1858. His son Hendrik died in 1737, and Andreas Hendrickson Hopper died in 1733. And their two sons, William and John, are the descendants here. So these two people here were third cousins because they go back to these two. And these two people here were first cousins because they were first cousins because Sarah Winters was the sister of Andrew Winters. Interesting, I got carried away with the concept of cousins, so I looked it up. And there are almost half as many states that forbid the marriage of first cousins as permit the marriage of first cousins. It's 25 prohibited, and then there are a couple that allow it, but both couples have to be over 50 or over 55. Or one of them has to be unable to have children. And one of them, North Carolina, they can be married if they're first cousins, but if they're double cousins, then they can't be married. And a double cousin would be a brother and sister who married a brother and sister. You know what I mean? So that they were double. They can't get married. No. But anyone who gets married in one of those states and comes to another state, their marriage is recognized. So it's kind of a new code. There's not one country in Europe that forbids the marriage of first cousins. Of course not. Look at all those kings and queens that were all married to their cousins. Right? It's most countries, it's not forbidden. In some countries, it's expected that you marry a cousin. The interesting thing is that the chances of a birth defect is 2 to 3% for non-related people. For first cousins, it's 3 to 4%, so it's not that much more. And there's no difference for second cousins. But that's known now genetically, not in 1860 when they started forbidding first cousins. Let's take a look at David's parents, David Hopper. There's a whole lot of essay in Carol's book, Ramapo Chronicles, which you can read about. When his parents were, as we say, they were second cousins. So Andrew Hopper was the son of David W. Hopper and Jane Maria Hopper, and born on 13th of May, 1848, and baptized 19th of May, 1848, at the Saddle River Reformed Dutch Church. Now, that's where the records show up, but they shared a minister with the Ramapo Reformed Church, so could have been married. It could have been actually baptized in Ramapo, but who knows. In June 1850, he was 2 years old and living with his parents, David W. and Jane Maria Hopper. I showed you that actually in the 1850 census I showed you. His grandparents, William G. and Bridget Hopper, and older brother William Hopper in Hohkus Township, Bergen County, New Jersey. In 1860, he was 12, living with his parents and two brothers in Hohkus Township, and the record was found on page 107. Emma Hopper was the daughter of John J. Hopper and Lavinia Winter, and she was born in June 1849 in New Jersey, and in June 1850, she was living with her mother, Lavinia, and 4 older siblings in the 16th ward of Manhattan. And she was identified as Martha, not Emma. But in 1860, Emma was 11 and living with her mother and all those same siblings in Hohkus Township. If you want to know why Emma was living in New York with her mother and her father wasn't there, read Carol's book. It's a juicy, juicy story. And I'll just kind of leave you hanging. And this is the Hoppers, warts and all, you know? Okay, so it shows the marriage of Andrew and Emma. They were married March 5th, 1870. Andrew G. Hopper was of Suffern, age 21, and they were married at the parsonage. And Miss Emma Hopper of Marlow was 19. The same thing. It could have been a Ramapo Lutheran church, or could have been the Saddle River one. Who knows? Okay. So this was March 5th, 1870. So June 18th, and this is the marriage record from the, when it was registered at Trenton. And that shows Andrew was 22 and Emma was 19, the same date, and in Hohkus, Bergen County, New Jersey. But this gives their parents' names. So the state record gives the parents' names. The church record only gave the names of the participants. So we know that it was David Hopper and Jane M. Hopper, and we know that her father was John Hopper and her mother was Lavinia. Special couple. And they were both single, so it was the first marriage probably for both. And we found that through Family Search, that's the Mormon site. And in 1870, this is kind of interesting, they show up living with his parents, his mother, Jane M. And she's XX. That's what she listed as her name, as her age. XX. She didn't want to tell us. Her son William D. is 26. And then there's Catherine, 21. Now, 1870 does not tell you their relationship. So Catherine could be a daughter. She could be William's wife. We don't know. Then there's a son, Andrew, and he's 23. We know his wife is Emma, because they were just married a few months before, but his brother Francis is listed before him. So it's hard to tell their relationship until you use other records. And it's bad to assume that, you know, you would think that Emma was a daughter and not the wife because she wasn't listed with her husband. Now, bear in mind, this is June 1870. Remember that. Emma's mother, Lavinia, writes her will, and she wrote it on the 20th December 1871. Her daughter Emma, the wife of Andrew Hopper, was to receive 1/5 of her estate, as were her other daughters. With daughter Sophia holding 1/5 of the estate in trust for daughter Emma, until such time as her husband dies or she is divorced. Like I said, people, you can't make this stuff up. You just can't make this stuff up. But think how much more you know about the family by having gone to the trouble of checking the probate records than if you had just gone on Ancestry and just did census records and that was it. This is priceless. Well, very conveniently, he died a few years later at the age of 28. According to his grandmother, Jane Maria Hopper's Bible, he died on the 6th of February, 1877. Carol, I don't know where you got this, but she had in her Ramapo Chronicles that he was thrown from his buggy by a runaway horse on the old logging bridge. And you just had 1877, so.
I probably got that from Tom Davis.
Okay. Yeah, it sounds like it was a newspaper thing. But where were Emma and her 2 children, David and Bergen, in 1880? When I followed the leaf, you know, the Ancestry leafs that are going to give you everything, they took me to Patterson and her married to Peter Hopper with children Mary, Rich, and Kitty. So that wasn't the right Emma. So I went to Family Search, that's the Mormon site, and I clicked on the search button there. And I entered David Hopper, and I entered that he was born in New Jersey, and I put between 1870 and 1872. Because if you just put 1871, you're limiting yourself. So I always put the year before, the year after, if I know the exact date. And all these records came up. The first one is the 1900 census. The second one is the 1940 census. The third one is the 1930 census. And then the 1920 census, 1910 census. And then we have that marriage record, 1871, when he married, September 1871, 1915 state census. And right here, we have his marriage record in 1897 to Anna C. Boger. But down here, we have 1880. David is living in Ramapo, Rockland County, New York. And he's living with Henry Wanamaker, Sarah Wanamaker, Emma Hopper, his mother, and so that's how I found that they were in Rockland County, because Ancestry was stuck on the fact that they lived in New Jersey. And you can never be stuck when you're doing genealogy. So there they are in Ramapo, and it turns out that Sarah Wanamaker is Emma's sister, and she's married to Henry Wanamaker. And strangely enough, in 1880, her other son, Benny, who died in 1881, was living with her other sister, Mary, and her husband, William Carlo, in Patterson. So maybe Emma couldn't afford to take care of both of her children, so one of them was with one sister, one with the other. It could be just it was summertime and one was visiting, who knows. But at least when the census was taken, the brothers were not together. This is also from Carol's book, The Death of Emma Hopper. Mrs. Emma Hopper burned to death in an accident at her son's house on Ramsey Avenue. She was burning leaves in the backyard when her dress caught fire. Only her grandchildren were at home at the time, and one of them tried to put out the flames with rags, and Mrs. Hopper rolled on the ground, but her clothes were almost completely burned off. Her cries woke Miss Rady Winters from across the street, and soon Albert Winter. When they tried to summon help, both Ramsey and Mawa doctors were out, and finally Dr. Sanford from Suffern administered opiates, but she died a few hours later. And that's from the Ramsey Journal, December 8, 1818. I always
That's
feel
1818.
1918, yeah, sorry. I'm not very good at typing. But I always feel sorry for the grandchildren. You know, what a horrible thing to have to see.
It's terrible.
Yeah, yeah. And you notice they didn't even bother to put her son's name in because everybody would know who they were talking about. You know, she didn't say to son David. It didn't have to. Everybody knew who it was. And this is the marriage record of David. Remember, we saw that in the Family Search Index. And that was when he married Anna C. Boger. They were married in Spring Valley, Bergen County, New Jersey, not Spring Valley, New York, which was in the Paramus area. I have an inventory here someplace. And it didn't scan very well, so I started typing it. It's a fabulous inventory. It's from Franklin Township, but John G. Hopper lived in the house that the college used to own on Ramapo Valley Road next to the cemetery. And he died in 1829. And his inventory was 3 pages long. It was extremely detailed. Some of the things cost 6 cents. Some of the things cost 12.5 cents. And these were the first few items in it. His purse was $7.50, that means his wallet. His wearing apparel, $20. His military uniform and sword, $10. A bay mare at $40, a bay horse at $50, a yoke of oxen at $50, a yoke of young steers, Dio was ditto. One brindle cow, $12.50, a red cow, a lineback brindle cow, a small brindle cow, a brindle or pied cow, a yearling bull calf, 3 yearling heifers, 2 calves, 15 sheep, 8 lambs, 2 barrows. Anyone know what a barrow is?
No.
It's a castrated pig. I'm surprised you didn't know that. And 3 small castrated pigs, as a matter of fact. 2 sows, 1 pig, and 2 pigs in a pen. 1 dog worth 50 cents, and 1 slut worth 25 cents. Now, you know what a slut is?
No.
It's the same as a bitch, actually, a female dog. And a lot of fowls and 3 turkeys. I have the original inventory here that you can look at. There are 202 items totaling $926.47.5. And the appraisers were William Hopper and Henry B. Hagerman, and for Charity Hopper and Abraham Van Horn, administrators.
That's like gasoline.
I'm going to show you that and pass it around. It is 4.5 pages. It's interesting. It has how many spoons they had, how many forks, 9. It's really interesting to look at. 1 old tea kettle worth 6 cents. 1 old pigeon net, $1.25. 1 old fish net, 25 cents. 1 lot of potatoes in the cellar, $3.50. Another lot of potatoes in the cellar, $2.50. 17 barrels, worth $2.01. 1 churning machine, $2. 1 churn, 50 cents. 4 milk tubs and 11 milk pails. Got quite a dairy going there. He did live in Mawa. The other one thing I wanted to show you was one thing that I struggled with for a long time, and that was William Hopper, and the name was H-O-P-P-E early in the records. In Dutch it was H-O-P-P-E or H-O-P-P-E-N, and it was pronounced Hopper. And for the English that sounded like Hopper. And so they kind of put an R on the end of it. But this will was written on the 19th of September, 1777, William Hopper of Ramapo, spelled with the P-O-G-H, Franklin Township, Bergen County, Yeoman. He mentioned his wife, Auntie, all she brought, and 25 pounds. Son, Andreas, $5. That usually meant that he was the oldest, and that was his birthright. Son John, the plantation where he dwells at Warwick, which would be Warwick, New York. My daughter Marici and Lena to have their outset. That would mean that Marici and Lena were not married because the girls were given an outset when they got married. Daughter Abigail Hopper, Jinichi, Marici, Leah, and Lena Hopper, the residue. The executors were David Christie and John Van Valen. The witnesses William Jenkins and Jacobus Berthoff and Jacobus Bogert, and it was approved the 1st of May, 1780. And the inventory was 366.11.9 pounds, and it was made by Jacobus Bogert and Roloff Westervelt. And that is an abstract of the will that was printed in books called the New Jersey Archives. This was in New Jersey Archives 34, page 254. Now my problem with this will was, he had a daughter, Anichi, and she's not mentioned in the will. And I had my suspicions that she was married to a Van Busker. But since she wasn't, and she had children, and she was dead by the time he wrote his will. So I had an Ann Hopper, lived in the neighborhood, married to a Van Busker, married to the sister of his son John. And I kept thinking, boy, she'd be the perfect candidate to be this, person. So I went down to Trenton, because Trenton is where the original wills are. The wills that are in Bergen County are copies of the original will. They're copied into books, but they're not original. So I went and I got the original will. And I was so excited until I saw it. Anyway, when I opened it up, there were holes. It had been folded into like fours, and a mouse or something had chewed the corner. So there were these huge holes in the will. And I read through the whole thing, and it took me maybe an hour and a half. And when I got to the very bottom, halfway blocked by a big hole, was to the heirs of my daughter Anish, which meant he had a daughter who was dead, who had heirs. And I went, wow, that's it. So I went running up to the archivist and I said, look, see, right here. The abstract was wrong. And she said, why didn't you use the recorded copy? And the recorded copy was taken from the original and recorded in books, like one in Bergen County would have been, except there wasn't one there in Bergen County. It was very legible, very clear about his daughter and everything. I could have read that in 10 minutes, had I known. Okay. So just kind of recapping all the kinds of records we use to tell these stories about the Ramapo ancestors. We use birth and marriage and death records. We use church and cemetery records, passenger records, passport records, probate records, wills and inventories, military records, draft cards, city directories, and family trees. I have one other thing. This is my commercial. The government of the United States, in its infinite wisdom, is no longer posting the Social Security Death Index information. And we want them to go back to posting it like they did. Because the Social Security Death Index was fabulous for finding people if you didn't know who the woman married, what her married name was. Because you could put in Mary and her exact birth date. You might find 7 Marys with that same birth date. But by process of elimination, you might be able to figure out who you're married. So there's a petition here that if you care to, would you sign so that we can get the Social Security Death Index back. Yes?
Maybe you should explain that.
Why don't you explain it?
Actually publishing the information about people who've died and their Social Security numbers helps prevent fraud, because then people who are dealing with records that a credit card application can actually check this list to make sure that that number does not belong to somebody who's dead. So there's been a lot of misunderstanding about the purpose and how that death index is used.
That's what I said in their infinite wisdom. They don't know what they're.
Thank you, Reed. This was very nice. Now we have time for some questions.
Sit down.
Well, you can still sit down.
No.
Questions? Yes, Dennis.
The house, about 3 or 4 pictures ago, you said that the house across from the college. What township? That wasn't listed as Hohkus Township. That was listed differently.
Oh, because first it was Franklin Township.
Franklin.
And then it changed to Hohkus
Oh.
Township. And then I think Mawa was the last,
Yeah.
last
Yeah.
part of the
Yeah.
Hohkus.
That was the lecture last month by Tom Data. He talked about the evolution of
That house is up for sale.
the Mawa and Ramsey,
It's
Hohkus.
not the Andrew Hopper Hopper, it's the Van Horn Hopper House that's next to the cemetery. And for a while.
It was the
a-
president's resident
And
at
it
the
was a
college.
dormitory for a while, then it was the president's
Right.
residence. Right.
Yes, and now it's for sale if you're so inclined. Other questions?
Gee, that was so good.
Do you know when they started passport thing, what's available, how far back online?
It's far back as they have records, but they cut it off around 1920, I think. The current, if a person is alive, they don't always publish it. A funny thing, I was looking, they just put on the World War II draft cards for younger men, but they don't list it by the man, they list their parents. So
For,
if it's
under
like
21?
John Smith was 17, but his father was Elroy Smith, you can find Elroy Smith in the index on Ancestry. You go to Elroy Smith and it's John Smith's application. John Smith could still be alive, which is why they don't put John Smith's name. So I couldn't quite understand that, but that's just a recent thing on Ancestry. But it lists the parents' names, not the person whose record it is.
And in a couple more years, then they'll have to change it and put the
Probably, yeah. It's like nuts,
Other questions? If not, I have a couple more announcements. We have a special exhibit that the museum is sponsoring at the Mawa Public Library. It's a great exhibit that the train crew set up. I invite you to stop by and see it. And the hours are listed on our website at mawamuseum.org. Also, for the next 3 Friday nights, we open at 6 o'clock, 6 until 9, for particularly to see the trains and to see all the exhibits in the museum. And a special visit from Santa on Friday the 19th at 7 o'clock, so stop by for that. And finally, Carol Green's book, The Chronicles, that Bree referred to in her lecture, is on special sale tonight for $55, so you can check that out. And Carol will even autograph it for you. And her images book is also available in the back tonight. So Bree, if you wouldn't mind entertaining other questions individually.
Sure.
Thank you again, and
See
we
you at coffee hour.
have food and beverage in the front, and thank you for coming, and thank you again, Bree.